Hey everyone, Reed here with Big Strong Book. Today I'm going to be reviewing The Forgetting Moon, Book 1 of the Five Warrior Angels trilogy by Mr. Brian Lee Durfee. Wow, I just will start off by saying I loved this book. This is the opening step in what is sure to be a great trilogy. So I should make mention, I first heard about this book from Brian Lee Durfee's YouTube channel, which I'll link to in the description below. I first heard of his channel maybe about a year ago or so, just in, looking for reviews about fantasy books, just perusing YouTube, and his channel came up because a lot of the books that I was getting into around this time last year, he was one of the only ones on YouTube to have not only reviews about them, but would discuss some of his favorite authors as well that lined up to what I was reading. I think the first video I saw of his may have been a review of The Dragon Bone Chair, which of course I read Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn last year and read The Last King of Ostenard. And what Brian Lee Durfee talks about on his channel, you get the sense not only from the stuff that he likes to read, the fantasy he likes to read. I mean, he reviews books from all sorts of genres, fantasy, sci-fi, thrillers, mysteries, all sorts of books. I don't think that there's a genre on his channel that is untouched review-wise. But one of the things he did was he talked about his own history with the work of Tad Williams, where he read it kind of as a teenager and that was the one of the first fantasy series that he read that really opened his eyes to what fantasy could offer. And he also spoke about that through his own history now as a published author, he's had the chance to meet Tad Williams, and I know they've done some Comic-Con panels together as well, it's really cool going from, a fan of a writer's work to then, decades later doing panels with them. That's got to be, I'm sure, very surreal for him. But in his videos on his YouTube channel, he always opens with an intro about himself and the books that he has written, just mentioning them. And The Forgetting Moon is the first book in his trilogy published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. Hadn't heard of the imprint and hadn't heard of Durfee as an author in his own right prior to just seeing his YouTube channel. And of course, the dude's, he's got so much humor and charisma, and I just love watching his videos. And so I had to check out his books for myself. And so I bought this probably last summer off of Amazon and, was reading other things. And so kind of pushed this off for a little while, but I've seen it, just kind of staring back at me on my shelf. And I'm like, all right, I think now is a good time to read it because, of course, as many of you know, last week I finished Kate Elliott's King's Dragon, the first book in her Crown of Stars series. And while I liked it, it wrapped things up a little too well, and I wasn't particularly motivated to jump right into book 2, Prince of Dogs. And so I saw The Forgetting Moon on my shelf, and I'm like, man, I think it's something I really want to dive into. Because it is, I really like Durfee's YouTube channel, and I've heard really great things about this trilogy from some booktubers, but also just, you look at the reviews that his books have received on Amazon and Goodreads, and clearly it just appears from those reviews that he's definitely after something here. And, I like big, fat fantasy novels, and I cannot lie, I guess. This is a huge 800-page epic, and I think he has said on his channel a few times that initially his what is now his trilogy was going to be a 5-book series, but he got a 3-book deal, and without cutting any of the story, they instead decided to make the trilogy into a trilogy, but 3 huge books as opposed to 5 maybe more medium-sized books. So The Forgetting Moon, this first book, is about 800 pages. Book 2 is 950. I think the third book is about 1050. So they each get longer. They're 3 massive books, but I mean, my God, his world building, the characters, which I'll get into here, are just so good. And it's almost hard for me to really describe what makes this book so great. I just think of it as being so cool and awesome. That's probably the best way to describe it. You know, this certainly is not a series for everybody. I know there are particular moments, probably about a third of the way through this book, that if you're on the fence, like graphic content wise, you're probably going to stop reading it. And I don't blame those readers. Everybody has their own comfort levels with, graphic content in works of fiction. I know I'm kind of the mind that I know what I'm comfortable with is, different from other readers, and that's okay. So yeah, this book, in terms of getting into the plot of it all, or what it's about. So this book takes place in a world of 5 separate nations known as the 5 Isles. And I'll see if I can show it here, if it shows up well on camera. But there's a great map. I love maps in fantasy books, and that's a pretty great one. And so all of essentially the 5 Isles. So I'll just kind of reading it off of the map here. From west to east, we have it's either Sor Severe, or it's, because I know I'm not sure what this character is called. It's in a lot of, I think, Scandinavian languages, but it's the O with a line through it. I think it's pronounced more like an sound, so it might be Sar or Sor Severe. I'm not sure. I'll just call it Sor Severe for simplicity's sake. And then there is the island of Windare, the island of Aiden White, Gold, the island, probably the biggest of all 5, the Isle of Golconda, and then the smallest of the 5, at the easternmost point, is Valvale. And there's a great conflict going on within this story, but not only a great conflict, but one of religious tension. And that is a big point within these books, which I will get to here in a little bit. So a lot of this world is centered around different interpretations of a source religion. So within this world, there is a deity known as Laijon, I believe spelled Laijon. The gist, I guess, of Laijon is similar to a Christ mythos, obviously with stuff different, and so most of the action of this book takes place on the isle or the nation of Golconda. And within that nation, they believe that Laijon died, and he ascended up into the heavens, and that there were these people around him, And together they were known as the 5 warrior angels. And the 5 warrior angels had these weapons or equipment that were, these core, almost angelic, magical items. There is a battle axe known as Forgetting Moon. There is a helm known as Lonesome Crown. A shield, I think, is Ethic Shroud. I could be wrong on that. And then there's also, I forget what weapons or what pieces of equipment they are, but there's another one called Afflicted Fire and another called Blackest Heart. And I should mention that book 2 of this, so the Forgetting Moon, the title of the book is also the name of this like magical battle axe. And each of these items also had an almost angelic stone with them. And so the pervasive belief of this, Church of Lejean is that as Lejean ascended up into heaven, the 5 warrior angels and all their vestments ascended with them. There is another sect called the Brethren of Mia. And Mia was, in this mythos, Mia was the spouse of Lejean, and the believers of the Brethren of Mia believe, this might be a minor spoiler, so you might want to skip ahead maybe 20 or so seconds. But they believe, just in saying what they believe, the Brethren of Mia believe essentially that the vestments never ascended into heaven, that they are still within this world. They are still physical items within this world. They are deemed by many they're kind of like a splinter sect. They're deemed by many within this church to be, blasphemous, heretical. And then there is a belief within the nation of Sor Severe that Lejean's heir, his son called Rejal, that each king and leader of Sor Severe is the heir of Rejal, and that eventually they will kind of conquer all these lands that were wrought from Sor Severe, and that the fiery absolution will be brought about, but that this heir of Rejal will be kind of the fulcrum point and will lead, kind of conquer all the lands and will lead them forward. Sor Severe has a very warlike culture. And so I'll dive in now into a little bit about the big nations that are at play here. So we have the nation of Golconda, where, as I mentioned, most of the action takes place along this isle. And the whole of the 5 isles are besieged by the armies of Sor Severe, the armies of the White Prince, Eros Rejal. So Eros, the White Prince, has, he's been deemed by his people, deemed by his kingdom as the son of the king to be the heir of Rejal, and he's taken it upon himself to conquer Aiden White, to conquer Wendare. That's, as the action of the book opens, we see him kind of finishing up the conquest of Wendare and then turning his attention towards Golconda. He's in the midst of his conquest of the 5 isles, believing to be kind of himself as the savior of the world to, get into, to lead them into fiery absolution. Then the Golconda, they are kind of led in as almost a binary rule system, or a twin ruling system. You have the silver throne of the land, so the ruling family of the I'm gonna mess up the last name, so I'm just gonna look into the book here just to make sure I have their the Bronichel family. They're the ruling family of Golconda, but also as important is the I think it's called The Church of Lejal. I'm just going to look in the yes, they're essentially known. I call it the Church of Lejal. They're known as like the quorum of there's also a faction that's led the quorum of five, archbishops, and kind of at the head of their order is Denarius, who's the holy vicar. And this book alternates between viewpoints for a lot of people kind of at the top. The capital city of Golconda is a city called Amadon, and we have John Drelin, who is the sister to the king, Jovan or Hoven. I'm not sure if it's a hard J or kind of an H sound. I'll just say it as Jovan. So we have John Drelin. She's a prominent viewpoint character, and she doesn't want. I think this might be later on in the book. It's not towards the beginning, but she almost views, she's like, is my role in everything just to be a pretty tapestry of one point in history of Golconda, in the history of the world? She is somebody who wants to leave a mark of her own. She doesn't want to be the wife of somebody, doesn't want to be remembered in that way. She wants to have agency. And as the story progresses she's just referred to most often as John, she wants to be a fearsome leader, to be a fighter in her own right, to gain those skills. She's a great character, and she's kind of frustrated because her brother, the King Jovan of Golconda, he's kind of an inept leader, and he's beholden to the church. Denarius kind of has power over him. So Jovan the king isn't a viewpoint character, but another one of the viewpoint characters is the younger sister of the king and the younger sister of John Drelin, Tala. And Talon might be one of my favorite characters within the story, because she is also one who she finds herself having to do these things in order to save somebody that is close to her. And she is always somebody who wants to be in the know. She feels that her brother, the king, looks down upon her. That's a sentiment that is shared between both sisters, John Drelin and Tala. But Tala is somebody who, a little bit about where her character trajectory is going. It is something, she's trying to piece together a mystery to again, as I said, to save somebody who's close to her. But at the same time, she's one of my favorite characters. I'm very curious to see where her arc will take her throughout the course of this narrative. But then, so we have Tala, we have John Drelin. There's also kind of, there's a guard called the Day Knights that are close to, that's close to the king, but they're also kind of a guard of the church as well. We have characters Culpabara, Sterling Prentice, great characters in their own rights. Sterling Prentice being a viewpoint character in a few chapters. And then we have, within the White Prince army, kind of as he is starting his conquest of the Five Isles, as he is finishing up his conquest of Wendare, turning his eyes to Golconda, we have the perspective of Galt Albrecht or Albrecht. Let me just look in here just to make sure I've got his Albrecht. Yes, Galt Albrecht. And he is one of the Knights Archaic of the White Prince, but he is somebody who is riddled with internal conflict. He is seeing the horror that the White Prince, that his conquest is leaving in its wake, and he's beginning to question things. We learn of his stepdaughter, who he hasn't seen in a while, and he is one of the most fascinating characters, and again, somebody whose character arc is off to a really great start. And then, perhaps the beating heart of this story is a character named Nail. And he is somebody who is an orphan, looked after by a mysterious man in his own right, a man, his ward, or his master is a man named Shawcroft. Shawcroft and Nail are living in this small seaside village known as Gallows Haven, kind of on the south side, or the southern edge of Golconda. It is a village or a little town where a lot of the money comes in from hunting these great beasts called Grakens. They are a very religious community as well. Religion of Lejean plays a big part in their life. But we're introduced through Nail. He's about 17 years old, wanting to understand his place in the world because he knows that there's mystery behind who his parents are. There's mention of a twin sister that he has, and his master, Shawcroft, isn't telling him these things, and of course he is disappointed. He wants more responsibility, and Nail, in many respects, kind of fulfills that orphan character trope. And there's a lot of tropes within this book that we have seen before, but Durfee initially, makes it seem like these prophecies within this book, all of these tropes, that he's doing it the way that we have seen it before. But as the novel progresses, as this first book progresses, particularly as it gets right towards the end, there is twisting towards these prophecies. There are complications to them, I'll say. And within each of the opening paragraphs, because each chapter follows the viewpoint of one specific character, kind of like A Song of Ice and Fire, we have these epigraphs that are taken from religious texts. And there are hints, if you follow along and you're like, okay, getting the information from these epigraphs, like many other great books. I think of a Stormlight Archive, where you have those little epigraphs at the beginning of each chapter that hint at where these twists, foreshadowing at revelations to come. And you get the sense that something isn't quite right with, these prophecies, these tropes. They're not just tropes. They're, as easy points, these tropes are starting places. Durfee is starting here, and he is expanding outward, twisting them in a unique way to where we haven't even really seen the full extent of how these tropes will twist. There's a moment, I won't say what it is, but there's a moment within the final chapter of this book where it's like, whoa, there's another, like a lasting revelation that a character kind of realizes, and I was taken aback. I'm like, okay, I was worried a little bit that these tropes would become too settled in and too simple, because, you think you have ideas for how these characters will fit into the prophecies, and the characters themselves spell it out. And while there could be aspects of those prophecies that are pretty set in stone, I just know down the line, I know that there are going to be twists to this. I could be wrong, though. These prophecies and these events foreshadowed, they could eventually settle into the ways that they seem to be settling. The twists could be red herrings or something, but I think there's going to be a little bit there. So I'm kind of waiting on that. That could present itself in book 2 or book 3, but it may not. I don't know how this story will turn out. It could be that maybe it ends more or proceeds more conventionally than I think it might based on how the first book, on how The Forgetting Moon ends, but I don't think it will. So as I mentioned, this book has tropes, many tropes, the orphaned teenage boy who wants more responsibility, the Jon Snows, the Simons of the fantasy world. And Durfee himself talks about, kind of these nameless orphan bastard children in fantasy that he was inspired by growing up. So it makes sense that given that that was such an inspiration for him, that he would have that as such a focal point of the story. And then we have, traditional tropes with prophecies and with religions, but they're done extremely well, because there are aspects of these religions that are revealed to not be that true, that they're a false variant of the truth. But even what characters then accept to be the real truth may not be the full truth after all, again, as the book wraps up. And not only we have a very diverse group in terms of the positions of power that they hold within their viewpoints. That's another thing that, as I mentioned, Durfee kind of lists in the acknowledgments at the beginning of this book. He lists his inspirations: Tad Williams, George R. R. Martin, Terry Brooks, Tolkien. There are so many inspirations, but he pulls the tropes of classical fantasy. He has the brutality of, George R. R. Martin, of, Joe Abercrombie, Stephen Erickson. He has those pulsating grimdark tendencies. So it's fascinating, truly, to see the interplay between classical fantasy tropes that have twists upon them, and then grimdark sentiments of a truly brutal world, a la a Stephen Erickson, a Stephen Donaldson, a George R. R. Martin. It's very cool to see that. With each chapter being a different view, or focusing just around a singular viewpoint character, that's, one jumps to thinking about A Song of Ice and Fire, and that is handled very well. You have the epigraphs that are common at the beginning of Malazan or Stormlight Archive books. There's inspirations from everywhere here, but even though there are things that you can clearly see as inspired from Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, inspired from A Song of Ice and Fire, it still feels so original here. And, again, it's hard because I'm so intrigued to see where these characters are going, how they all end up. And that, with reading King's Dragon last week, that wasn't something I felt. It wasn't just, I wasn't really, I was missing that emotional pull. And I'm very curious to see where this is going to go. I think the main criticisms that I've heard about this book are that, particularly, I've seen a lot of criticisms surrounding the character of Nail, that, people might view him as whiny or something like that. I didn't get that impression at all. I was never annoyed by any of the viewpoint characters within this book, least of all Nail. But again, as I think as I was going to say, but I maybe got off track. This book has such a diverse viewpoint of characters in terms of the power that they hold. We have Nail. We have characters that are heavily involved in the political game. We have John Draylen, who is trying to make a name for herself. We have her younger sister Tala, who is trying to have greater agency. She's at that age where she is not sure the pull she wants to have. She's kind of beset upon by these outside forces that are controlling her to go down a specific path. And there's a lot of mystery surrounding her character, I think. we have characters like Galt, who is, he is a part of a murderous war campaign onslaught that he is trying to figure out his own place in. We have characters like Ava Shea, who is part of this Gallows Haven contingent as Gallows Haven starts to see the horrors of war that they have heard about begin to really sweep upon them. And as I mentioned, Brian Lee Durfee on his channel, he has a couple videos where he reads. It's very funny. He reads negative comments and reviews from websites about his book, particularly about the Forgetting Moon. And one of the biggest criticisms, and I mentioned this at the beginning of this review, is that this is a hard R book. There are throats slashed. There are limbs severed in very brutal fashion and very emotionally charged scenes. This is a book that really leaves nothing on the table. And this is where you could argue that Durfee really leans into his grimdark influence. I'm never one to say that I am fully in grimdark only or classical fantasy only. I love to see both, and that's why I think I really love this book, is because it is such a great synthesis of classical and grimdark sentiments. It was so cool to see that, because Durfee is obviously influenced from both camps, that he's able to kind of chart a middle path here, and that was really cool. So anyways, should probably wrap this up here. So because saying more would dive into spoilers, and I want to keep this as spoiler free as possible. I think when I finish this trilogy, because I know I want to soon, I think I'll do a full spoiler review once I wrap things up and have a good perspective for this trilogy as a whole, once I finish it. So The Forgetting Moon gets, I think, probably a perfect 5 out of 5. As it was getting towards the end, I was leaning like maybe it's a 4, maybe it's a 5. But with how it ended, the strength and just desire to continue. I didn't have that desire last week with King's Dragon. I have it wholeheartedly with this. I have the other 2 books. I can't wait to dive straight into The Blackest Heart, which is the second book, which is even bigger than this. It's even bigger, thicker. I'm sure it's going to be just as great, if not better, than this book. And it's a shame that this book doesn't have as great of attention as it does. I think I looked on Goodreads. This has less than 2,000 ratings, not even reviews, ratings, less than 2,000. So, those who can, I have heard that the audiobook for this is great. Obviously, the cover art, Richard Anderson, who has done, I think, Kings of the Wild, that series, the band, or I'm not sure exactly what that series is called, but Richard Anderson, as you can see here, fantastic cover art. He did the cover art for all 3 books. And the trilogy is complete. That is another great seller for this. The trilogy is complete, so there's no waiting around, no cliffhangers that you can resolve by picking up the next book right away. So again, a 5 out of 5 from me. I'm going to link to Brian Lee Durfee's channel. I highly suggest you just check his Booktube channel out, because I think it's great. He's a very hilarious and very passionate guy who just loves books with every fiber of his being. And so can't wait to dive into The Blackest Heart. If you guys have read The Forgetting Moon, let me know what you think of this. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys next time.